Hi, and welcome back to Unlabelled and Limitless. In today's episode, Krisana and I are having a very honest conversation about substances, neurodivergence, and the often blurry line between self medication and self understanding. This is not about glamorizing drugs or dismissing addiction. It's about curiosity, context, and exploring why so many neurodivergent people reach for substances in the first place, and what happens when we shift from a deficit lens to a more compassionate, informed one.
So right now I'm sober, which is no alcohol, no weed. I realize that I'm much more a pot smoker than alcohol for sure. Just because I actually feel like I felt normal when I was smoking weed. Some of my best experiences have been on ecstasy in Thailand. Full Moon Festival?
I've heard of it. I haven't been to it.
You would fucking love it. If you've gone to Burning Man, you love Full Moon Festival. My bungalow where I stayed was here, and it literally is like a wooden door with like a luggage lock.
Wow.
You had to go up these rickety wooden stairs to get to the bar, and on there was a huge rock next to the base of the stairs, and it's in the shape. It was a mushroom. So they made you mushroom smoothies.
Oh, very nice.
Delicious, delicious. That was like 500 bucks. It was $25, $30, and you were lifted. But anyway, some of my most transformational experiences have been on ecstasy, definitely weed as a base. I've done ayahuasca a couple times. And so, yeah, just curious. That's a cool, interesting tangent from your previous work. Also, working with other companies in the future that are thinking about therapy for that.
Yeah, we should definitely explore this a lot more because there's a huge correlation between people that are neurodiverse and alcoholism, drug addiction or dependency, and a whole bunch of other things. And what they're realizing now is basically everybody's actually self-medicating and giving their body exactly what they need. And some of the most recent research in medications for ADHD, I think it is mostly ADHD because that's the only one really that I know of that you can truly medicate. I know with Tourette's, there's certain medications that can help with the anxiety and lessen the tics and things. But yeah, I think in general, because a neurodiverse brain is just a different brain chemistry, right? It's really difficult to alter something that is fundamentally different. But for ADHD, the latest research is in nicotinoids and cannabinoids. And obviously, they're not encouraging everybody to go start smoking. What they're trying to do is find out what it is within the nicotine that helps to calm the ADHD system. What is it in alcohol that helps to calm the ADHD system? And what you tend to find is a lot of people that have ADHD, and I can't speak for everybody because this is definitely not an across the board.
Totally.
But a lot of people with ADHD have gone through different cycles of taking different types of drugs and then being, oh, this is fun. It doesn't really work for me. It's like there's only so many lines of coke somebody's going to snort with their friends where they realize, oh, they're having the time of their life and I'm busy like cleaning my bedroom or doing these really weird normal things. And I'm thinking really clearly for once. And when you think about treatment for ADHD is microdosing amphetamines, right? Because you need to stimulate the brain. Every time somebody with ADHD is taking a stimulant, whatever kind of drug it is, whether it's nicotine, whether it is a cannabinoid, they're essentially self-medicating, right? And I know a lot of people, when it comes to ADHD, they're like, oh, it's just because people want to be drug addicts. And if we actually like acknowledge that those medications work, and they're finding now as well that ADHD medications can change the neuroplasticity of your brain in the long term. So rather than being like, oh, Ritalin is overdiagnosed and Adderall is just kiddie coke and that's why they want it, we actually looked at it from the therapeutic and scientific perspective, what it's actually doing, and along with obviously too much of anything is a bad thing, but
Sure.
like the people that have dabbled in coke and amphetamines and different things like that, what they've actually done in some respects is build some of those connections that were missing, whereas other people are destroying those connections.
Right.
For an ADHD brain to give it that stimulation and to get the neurons firing the way they're supposed to and different hormones working properly, you're actually like building receptors, you're building neuroplasticity. So getting that dosage right and treating people at the right time may actually help us to avoid a lot of people becoming dependent on alcohol, on whatever else it is. And if we look at Gen Alpha and Gen Z, who are more diagnosed than millennials and Gen X's, they are drinking less. They are smoking less by choice. And part of that is because they understand who they are. They've been diagnosed. They know what their identity is. It's interesting that you bring that up because I think there's a lot of people out there that when they actually discover drugs, really do discover who they are, and it can have a very positive effect on them going forward, but it's the right thing, the right time, the right situation. There's a dose of luck in there, right? Because if you're buying things illicitly, you never really know what you're consuming and things. So there's that risk in there as well. But yeah, I think if we looked at things more holistically and started rather than seeing drugs as a crutch and see them as something to be studied and developed and maybe even utilized in mental health treatments, like we'd find ourselves in a much different space. In the 1980s, you could walk into a bar in New York City and buy cocaine along with your vodka. That is a true story, right? And Ronald Reagan's war on drugs came along, and then you couldn't buy cocaine. And then we ended up with a crack epidemic and a whole bunch of other stuff. When you look at cause and effect as well, sometimes legalizing and regulating leads to a lot less addiction. It leads to more awareness. It leads to more people having choices and things, but it's a big experiment. Would take a long time to discuss.
Luckily, the stigmas are slowly fading away, but there is a lot of prejudice from past propaganda and government clampdowns. From my personal experience, my favorite thing to do was smoking a bowl and having a cup of coffee. And the person I was seeing that time asked me why I did that. And I thought about it and I was like, I think I do this because I want to wake my body up and calm my brain down all at the same time to get to a level of evenness. And that was the first time I was able to talk about it. I wouldn't consider myself a lazy person, but I need to find a way to relax to get to do the things that I feel like I have a hard time doing.
As we start your journey towards discovery and exploring neurodiversity and whether or not you may ultimately go and ask for a test and a diagnosis, what I want to talk about is some of the more positive aspect. I'm not suggesting neurodiversity is a positive will, but what I want to do is talk about some of the positive traits, the positive aspects, because as a practitioner, I really come from a school of thought of like positive psychology. And when I studied psychology 20 plus years ago now and graduated, I was actually quite disillusioned at the time because I didn't feel like psychology fit the moment. And I came to America and I fell into a career that I wasn't expecting, and I've had my own journey. But as I've gone back to psychology and just studied my master's, what I'm seeing now is the psychology that I hoped to see 25 years ago.
Ahead of the time.
Yeah.
Pioneer.
It wasn't for me at that time to be in that world doing and fighting. I had my own life to live. I had my own fight. So going back to it, what I found is that there's schools of psychology now that didn't exist when I was studying. And one of my biggest problems with psychology and the medical field in general is that we're very deficit focused. It's always about what's wrong
Yeah.
and how can we fix it. And very rarely do we give space to what's right and how do we use that effectively within our community, within our family dynamics, within our workplaces, so that we can all have these fulfilling lives where we feel hopeful. And I think more so now than any other time that I've been alive, the disillusionment, the depression, the anxiety, the discontent, the anger, and the misalignment is so pronounced that what I would like to focus on with you is not a positive, cheerful journey, like nothing goes wrong in life, because that isn't what positive psychology is about.
Could you explain what
Yes.
just in case people who are listening aren't familiar with it?
So positive psychology is a school of thought within psychology or a perspective where instead of looking at the deficits and what's wrong, we look at the positives and what's right. And through those positives and what's right, we look to build resilience and hopefulness and give people the tools that they need, not to be happy all the time, because we all know that the pursuit of happiness is a fool's game, right? Happiness is just fleeting moments.
Right.
And we talked about this a little bit last week when we talked about spirituality. And we can do a quick recap on that as well. Because there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of crossover between Buddhism and positive psychology and psychoanalysis. So I'd love to explore that a little bit more. But what I want us to really focus on is making this a positive journey of discovery for you, right? And giving you the tools that you need, not to be happy all the time, but to be able to confidently feel resilience during periods of uncertainty, or when life happens, because life does happen and you can't stop it from happening. You have the support network in place and you know how to use it and you understand what your value is within that, right? Because quite often when things start going wrong in our lives, or we're feeling that we're not achieving what we're supposed to be, or we're getting left behind, we then turn inwards and we start isolating ourselves.
Totally.
And I know that as the more burnt out I got over the last few years, the more I retracted and the more I went inwards, and I would not share with family and friends anymore. And I just tell people everything it was okay, and it wasn't.
Right.
And I completely lost my resilience. And having built that back up and built that back up through some of these positive psychology interventions, through my own coaching, and through the network of people that I've built, what I'd like to do is explore those things with you as you move on to this journey, and then make a decision whether or not you will get diagnosed or go to see somebody.
I think there's a couple things I want to respond to that, is that where I am in my life as a middle-aged person, figuring out what I built as far as my own personal biases and what are things that are fixed versus unfixed. And I want to say fixed as in broken, but like we were talking about earlier, is this your neurological makeup or something, or is this something that you can practice?
Yes.
I think having more of that delineation could help, because there's been times in my life where, and I always thought you can go into attachment styles where I'm like, I'm an avoid attachment style, or maybe that's my personality, or maybe it's because maybe the things where everything's great, ship shape, blue sky, and we're not always feeling comfortable being, how are you doing? And I'm like, awful, versus keeping your chin up. And especially with Black Taxi, it's very blue skies where everything is awesome. I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with myself being, I feel like shit. How much is that nature nurture? How much was I raised like that? How much was career? Because you want to thank everybody for spending $25 to see you play music. I know I didn't want to be like the Debbie Downer of the group or whatever like that. So I'm really curious about that for sure. I definitely would say like the things that I have been really surprisingly felt better about from a psychological standpoint is even though as a kid I had a really bad stuttering problem, any kind of job where I can think on my feet and be in this moment with you and be able to communicate a casual way, not necessarily, I want to give a presentation right now, or I memorize this speech, but more like of a casual idea exchange. And which kind of reminds me right now, like I'm working in a part-time job at Apple. So there are times where I'm engaged with a person, time flies.
Yeah.
But everywhere else, time drags. For example, right now, I'm between apartments. I'm moving where the economy is going. I'm moving my apartment. Full disclosure, if you're there having to do this with you, I'm moving back with a parent. And that could be seen as a failure and loss. And I'm trying to use this as a way to reset, and which is why I'm talking with you. Ask away. Let me know how we should go about this.
You touched on some of it for sure, but I think the first thing is understanding what it is that you really want to get out of this and what your goals are. And that might not be something that you can think of immediately on the spot. But I think it's really important that we start with some kind of a goal so that we've got something to work towards, right? And full admission, I'm terrible at sitting down and thinking, how do I write an actionable goal?
Got it.
Because I have ADHD and I'm going to forget to check in on my own goal. And it's hard to hold myself accountable. But it's something that I've had to really learn, especially now that I have two businesses and the buck stops with me, right? So if I can't hold myself accountable, then I certainly can't hold anybody else accountable. So it's definitely been this learning experience for me of being able to set goals that are actionable and find a way for me to hack my own brain to make sure I stay focused on those goals. So as well as having an idea of what you want to achieve or get out of it, what we also need to consider is not the reality or how realistic it is, because I believe in having big dreams and big goals and things, but within the time frame, how achievable is something, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's so easy for us to put a ton of pressure on ourselves, right? I've got to do these huge, massive things. I need to change everything about myself and I need to be more whatever it is.
Right.
When in actual fact, what we need to do is start changing small things or start looking at the little things and then building upon that, right? Because that's what you do. And if you think about all those positive emotions, we build them, right? You build resilience, you build complexity, build confidence, things. So when we talk about positive emotions and we focus on them, we're always talking about what we're going to build, right? So when you think about what your goal is, or when you think about what your goals are, think about it in more simplistic terms of where are we starting and what is it that you want to achieve within these sessions and within this journey.
Sure. I'll do the best I can, but I think your analogies of building something is really helpful. And I think what I've always been really had a hard time with was realistic goals. And maybe that's having to do with time. Because what is time?
Yes.
Sometimes I overestimate what I can do in a month, but maybe underestimate what I can do in a year. As a creative person, as a musician, I've had a couple biases that I need to work at where I've always felt things that I really love that I'm good at don't make me any money. And the idea of getting a job has come from a place of scarcity. And when you come from a place of scarcity, You'll grab anything you want. You'll try to get the highest rate, and it just feels like a compromise. I guess I could do that, or I guess I could put up with that. And I realize the way the world works right now, the amount of, I guess the word is sweat equity that you have to do toward a job with onboarding and training and learning new skills. You really need a lot more than that to stick with a job. And this didn't work. Let me jump towards something else. This didn't work. Let me do something else. And maybe if I needed to stick with it longer, but it's got to be something that is meaningful enough. It's got to be a big enough task for me to be on to this journey,
Yeah.
but also not too big where I feel like a freaking failure the whole time. So I'm trying to spend this time as a reset, getting to a place where I'm like, I got my necessities.
Yeah.
I have a roof over my head. I have a place to sleep. I have food. Like I have a car. I have all those things. When the dust settles, what can I reassess and realize what am I really good at? How do I cultivate the things that I'm good at to giving myself even more skills with that, adding on additional skills to it? And then how do I communicate that and verbalize that in a resume, in a CV, or a networking that puts me in the best percentages of success? And additionally, and I don't want to make this over ambitious, but how do I identify fields or industries that I could spend the next 20 years of my life, and my high level 5-point goal? But feel free to add or change or let me know if that's too much or too little. I think the main thing right now is sustainability.
So what you just talked about then puts me in mind of Scott Barry Kaufman's book Transcend, which is just sitting over there right now.
Okay, we'll do a little overlay of the book right here. Yeah.
And also Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Cool.
And Maslow's hierarchy of needs is pretty famous. However, the depiction of it is actually completely wrong.
Interesting.
And Maslow didn't actually invent the pyramid. I forget the guy's name now, but it was invented by some business guy in the 60s,
Gotcha.
and he put the needs into this pyramid. So it became this kind of thing that we all needed to achieve. Hey, you need this safety here, which is your shelter, like a roof over your head, food in your belly, and then you have love, and then you have this, and then you reach the pinnacle of attainment, right, at the top, and then you self-actualize. So it's this theory of self-actualization, where in actual fact, Maslow himself had said a few times, my work's been a little bit misinterpreted because it isn't like this step up. These things can happen at any time, and they can happen in different orders, and some are more reliant on others than others are, etc. And
that's helpful, by the way.
Yeah,
that's really helpful. Yeah.
So Scott Barry Kaufman was invited to rewrite Maslow's work, and had his original works and unseen papers and access to family vaults and things. And he's written what it means to self-actualize. And my master's paper I just finished writing was focusing on carers, but in the tradition of positive psychology, what I wanted to focus on was hopefulness and positivity in carers, because I wanted to see, like, how hopeful and positive do they feel? Because if they don't feel good about themselves and what they're doing, then the person they're caring for is not getting the best treatment, care, and help. And
True.
It's a two-way street. The carer needs to be cared for. I'd done a lot of studies on positivity and hopefulness, resilience, etc. And I focused on hopefulness, and hopefulness is agency plus pathways.
Great.
So you can be hopeful, but have no agency. You can have agency, but lack hope.
Wow.
But to have both of them together, you have hopefulness, which is a way of thinking and a way of being where okay, this path is blocked, but there's 3 other pathways here
Mm.
that we can go down, right? And okay, like, this government system sucks, but here's a way we can change it from the bottom upwards. I think like the Bernie Sanders movement was a good example of
Got
that,
it.
and the
Yeah.
Trump movement, right? Of
Sure.
that was they were both very bottom up movements to change a system that people were unhappy with. These types of things then can take a hold coming upwards, right? Because people found hopefulness that their vote actually did matter, and people that didn't vote before came out and voted
True.
and they got involved in it because finally they had a pathway and agency. Their agency was their vote, but their pathway was 2 very different leaders that were speaking the popular speak that gave them a different way to make change in government. So I think that's a very kind of clear example of modern day where agency met that kind of
Right.
belief and it turned into something. And a lot of depression, a lot of loneliness, and a lot of different emotions that we feel in that negative are because people lack agency. They don't feel like they have the power to make change in their own life,
Mm.
to make change in somebody else's life, right? There's also a difference between personal agency and systemic agency, right? You can be a very hopeful person. I'm going to stick with American politics right now because I just think these are really good examples of it. AOC.
Sure.
AOC was somebody that clearly felt a lot of hopefulness and personal agency and saw a pathway and did the unthinkable and got to where she got to. But then once she was in the system, she lost her hopefulness within the system because it kept knocking her down and telling her she was wrong and telling her no. So she had to then find a different way
Mm.
and go through that period of people being very mean to her. What
Yeah.
happened to you? Whatever. Because once you're in the system and you realize it's built against you, and to change it is going to take more than TikTok videos and whatever else, right? That systemic agency and hopefulness can disappear. So you can be a very hopeful person and be a system where you lack hope and you lack the ability to see the vision at the end of it. That's one of the things I really believe we're seeing in companies right now, in workforces. Like you talked about it, right? We're in a place of scarcity right now. We're having mass layoffs. It's been death by 1,000 paper cuts or layoff by 1,000 paper
Yeah.
cuts over the last 3 to 4 years. And it's finally catching up with people, right? Now people lack agency. During the pandemic, hope was abundant and so was the money, right? Because people had agency and they had pathways. I can go and get a job the other side of the country from my living room in New York and I can get paid $50,000 more for it, right? They don't have that now. So what you're seeing with disengagement is there's a lack of agency, there's a lack of pathways because you can't get out of something if there's nothing to go to.
Right.
And you can't move up if your organization's stagnant.
Mm.
And if they've got no money, you're also not moving out. So they're
Right.
not creating pathways. So I'm going to flip here and probably get very confusing. But there's a saying about Krishna, right, where he was eating the soil and his mum told him to open his mouth. And when he opened his mouth, she saw the entire universe.
Thank you for listening. If today's conversation stirred something for you, know that you're not alone, and that curiosity is often the first step toward clarity. Remember, you are not broken, you are not behind, and you are not alone. You are unlabeled, and your potential is limitless.